being here. He's the legal director of the Montana Innocence Project, who has spent an awful lot of time working on this case. This morning, I filed a motion to dismiss the judgment in the underlying conviction of the Cody Marble case. The Montana Supreme Court, as many of you know, recently reversed the case, mandating that we take a more critical look at the foundation of Marble's conviction. This determination was made after an extensive review of thousands of pages of documents spanning 14 years, which included initial investigative reports, depositions, trial transcripts, appeal records, post-conviction litigation documents. Additionally, we reviewed materials and documents that were not submitted to the court, which weigh on the validity of the sentence, and interviewed and/or attempted to interview several witnesses regarding subsequent developments to the case. It's never too late to do the right thing. This idea is embodied best in a story by William Fitzpatrick. William Fitzpatrick is the current president of the National District Attorneys Association. He's also the district attorney in Syracuse, New York. He tells this story. I always recall the sad case of Jack and Marion Fisher. A number of years ago at a cold case meeting, the homicide of Marion Fisher came up. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled with her own stocking. Her husband, Jack, had been the main suspect for over a quarter of a century. In fact, at the meeting, a cop opined, "The husband did it, we just can't prove it." One of the DNA techs suggested testing a cloth found near Marion's body. 2 weeks later, the tech called to tell me, and I'm talking about the President Fitzpatrick, to tell me a full DNA profile had been recovered, only it wasn't Jack Fisher. The killer was a man named Carlton Gary, who was then residing on death row in Georgia for strangling over a dozen women. In fact, his nickname is the Stocking Strangler. One of the first calls I made was to a man I had never met, Jack Fisher, and we talked for almost an hour. He asked if I could send proof of what I had just told him, as one of his children was estranged from him, believing he had killed their mother. During the second call to Jack Fisher, some weeks later, I heard the commotion of children laughing and playing in the background, and to my joy, learned that they were the grandchildren Jack Fisher had never seen. That's what prosecutors do. We convict the guilty, we exonerate the innocent, and in some cases reunite a man with his family, because it's never too late to do the right thing. It's really paramount to examine prosecution ethics and the Constitution as well. As sworn prosecutors, we will always search for the truth. The American Bar Association's standard of criminal justice and our other ethical rules clearly spell out our responsibility. The duty of a prosecutor is to seek justice, not merely to convict. The Constitution requires that we always strive to do the right thing at the right time, in the right manner. In conducting the search for justice in this case, we've come to the conclusion that the underlying judgment must be dismissed. Earlier views of the case were looked through a much narrower lens at a different piece of this trial puzzle when the case held a different legal posture. We take this position after a weighty consideration of our ethical obligation to do justice. Our examination today looks back at the investigation, the trial, and what's happened since the trial. Since Marble's conviction, at least 3 witnesses have recanted, including the victim. They've recanted their statements and their testimony. Of the original podmates that testified at trial, 3 are dead. Of those alive, importantly, 2 initially said that they witnessed oral sex versus anal sex until they were corrected by an investigator. The first juvenile to disclose the crime and get the ball rolling on the whole prosecution was an inmate named Scott Cruz, who it was later determined lied about everything. He could not have seen anything from the cell he was locked inside at the time of the alleged assault. A host of law enforcement officers testified that the crime could not have happened, that there was no adequate window of opportunity, and that the other inmates concocted a setup and or that Marble was railroaded.